Based on the evidence gathered, information learned from interviews, and the fact that no one in Nikki's family has seen or heard from Nikki since her disappearance, the detectives has determined that Nikki is a victim of homicide. Detectives also further concluded that Nikki's husband, Tyler Scott McCain, is responsible for Nikki's death and disappearance.
A grey Chevy Avalanche sits abandoned on a lonely stretch of Highway 36, right where Tehama County bleeds into Shasta County. No driver, no blood trail leading away. Just the truck, doors closed, parked like whoever left it meant to come back. They never did. Inside the covered bed, investigators find something that turns their stomachs before they even open the tailgate. The unmistakable, overwhelming odour of decomposition. And when they finally pull back that covering, they find a white sheet. Stained. Soaked. Later confirmed, through DNA, to be the blood of a 39-year-old mother of 4 named Nikki Cheng Saley McCain. She had vanished 8 days earlier, and for 15 months her family would beg, plead, and organise search after search for a woman that investigators would eventually conclude was never coming home, because, they allege, someone she trusted more than anyone in the world made sure of it. This is Crime Autopsy, and today we're dissecting the case of Nikki Saley McCain, a story about a woman who did everything right. She reported the abuse. She went to the hospital. She was ready to stand in a courtroom and tell a jury what her husband did to her. She just never got the chance. Before we cut into this one, hit subscribe. This channel exists because cases like Nikki's deserve to be picked apart in detail, not glossed over in a 2-minute headline. And drop a comment when you're done watching. I want to know what part of this case stops you cold, because for me, it's not the truck. It's what happened the truck. Let's get into it. Before Nikki Saley McCain was a case number, she was a daughter, a sister, and a mother of 4 children who, by every account from the people who loved her, built her entire world around them. She stood barely 4'11". She weighed around 110 pounds. If you saw her in a grocery store in Redding, California, you would not have looked twice. She was, by every description, unassuming, gentle, the kind of woman who disappears into a crowd rather than commands one. That detail matters. Hold on to it. Because later, when we talk about what investigators say happened to her in the final years of her life, her size is going to become one of the most important pieces of context in this entire case. Nikki lived in Northern California, in the Redding and Anderson area of Shasta County, rural, forested, the kind of landscape where towns blur into ranchland and the nearest neighbour might be a mile down a dirt road. She was married to a man named Tyler McCain. Together, they had 4 children. And according to court documents and statements from Nikki's family, their marriage was not what it appeared to be from the outside. Every domestic violence case worth investigating has a moment where the truth first cracks the surface. For Nikki, that moment came in December 2023, months before she vanished. She showed up at a local hospital emergency room. A sheriff's deputy who responded would later testify that Nikki had been, in his words, severely beaten, and not by someone her own size, someone much larger. She had 2 blackened eyes, bruising across her face and body. Prosecutors would later lay out in far more disturbing detail what they allege happened to her that day. That Tyler McCain dragged her around their own home, struck her in the face, bound her limbs with duct tape and poured cold water over her, before she was finally able to escape. Let that sink in for a second. Duct tape. Cold water. In her own house. The one place a person is supposed to be safest. Based on that incident, Tyler McCain was charged with 4 felony counts stemming from the alleged assault. He pleaded not guilty. For a moment, it looked like the system was working exactly the way it's supposed to. A victim comes forward. Police document her injuries. Prosecutors file charges. A court date gets set. Nikki was scheduled to appear for a settlement conference on June the 3rd, 2024, in that domestic violence case. A case where she was expected to testify, in her own words, about what her husband had allegedly done to her. She never made it to that court date. On the evening of May 17th, 2024, Nikki texted her sisters. It was an ordinary message, the kind of check-in siblings send each other without a second thought. She told them she was driving a 2002 Chevrolet Avalanche back toward her mother-in-law's property, near the Wind River Resort and Casino in Shasta County. That text, sent at roughly 12:35 in the morning, is the last confirmed communication anyone has ever had with Nikki Saley McCain. According to prosecutors, cell phone records show her phone connected to the network at her home just after 3 a.m. that same night, May 18th, 2024. Witness statements and forensic data, they say, place her at home with Tyler McCain during those early morning hours. And then, nothing. No calls, no texts, no social media activity, no sightings. A woman who, by every account, revolved her entire life around her 4 children, simply stopped existing in any traceable way. For a few days, her family assumed, hoped, there was an explanation. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she was staying somewhere to cool off after a fight. But Nikki wasn't the kind of mother who disappeared on her kids without a word. As the days stretched on with total silence, her sisters knew something was deeply wrong. On May 22nd, 2024, Nikki's sister walked into the Reading Police Department and reported her missing. 2 days later, because Nikki was last known to be in Shasta County, the case was formally transferred to the Shasta County Sheriff's Office, and that's when the real investigation began. One day after taking over the case, detectives served a search warrant on the home Nikki shared with Tyler McCain, seizing items of evidentiary value. They were building a picture. But the piece that would change everything came 4 days later. On May 25th, 2024, exactly 1 week after Nikki was last seen, Nikki's grey Chevy Avalanche, license plate DP154UT, was located abandoned off Highway 26, near the border where Shasta County meets Tehama County, close to the Begum Gorge Bridge on Highway 36. Crime scene investigators moved in immediately, and what they found inside that truck bed would become the physical backbone of this entire case. The truck bed had an enclosed covering. When investigators opened it, they were hit with what prosecutors would later describe in court documents as an overwhelming odor of decomposition. Inside, they recovered a white sheet, stained, marked, saturated with what looked like blood. DNA testing later confirmed that blood belonged to Nikki. But that wasn't all. Prosecutors say additional evidence recovered from inside the vehicle and the truck bed provided what they called overwhelming support that Tyler McCain was the primary source of DNA on items unrelated to blood or bodily fluids found at the scene. In plain terms, investigators allege that Nikki's blood was in that truck bed, and Tyler McCain's DNA was all over the surrounding evidence. Sheriff Michael Johnson would later tell reporters that crime scene investigators processed the vehicle and located physical evidence that, in his words, indicated foul play. A missing persons case had just become something far darker. But it would take another 15 months before an arrest was made, 15 months of searches, interviews, warrants, and a family refusing to let their sister's name fade from the headlines. If you're new here, this is exactly the kind of case Crime Autopsy exists to break down, not just the headline, but the evidence trail underneath it. If you want more deep dives like this one, subscribe now so you don't miss the next case. And I want to hear from you in the comments. At what point in an investigation like this do you think detectives already know who they're looking for? Drop your theory below. I read every comment. Now let's get into the 15 months that followed. Here's where this case takes one of its most infuriating turns. Remember those 4 felony domestic violence charges against Tyler McCain from the December 2023 incident? The ones tied to the court date Nikki was scheduled to testify at on June the 3rd, 2024. On July 5th, 2024, about 6 weeks after Nikki disappeared, those charges were dismissed. Community outrage followed almost immediately. How could the case against the last person known to be with a missing woman simply vanish? Years later, Shasta County District Attorney Stephanie Bridget would publicly address that decision, and her explanation reveals just how tangled this case had become. She explained that the domestic violence case couldn't be proven without Nikki's own testimony, and prosecuting it at that stage risked compromising what was by then becoming a homicide investigation into Tyler McCain himself. In other words, the very act that may have been designed to silence Nikki as a witness, her disappearance, was, for a period, working. The case against her alleged abuser collapsed because the one person who could testify against him was gone. It's the kind of detail that should make anyone's stomach turn. If the special circumstance allegation prosecutors would later file is true, that silence wasn't an accident. It was the entire point. For over a year, the Saleh family lived in an agonizing limbo. No confirmed sightings, no body, no arrest, just an open wound and a truck full of forensic evidence sitting in an evidence locker. But behind the scenes, the investigation never stopped. Detectives conducted what the sheriff's office would later describe as numerous search warrants and numerous searches. They interviewed family, friends, and acquaintances of Nikki, trying and failing to locate her. In March 2025, nearly a year after she vanished, detectives escalated the investigation dramatically. Along with FBI and Homeland Security agents, they served another search warrant, this time at the home in Happy Valley, where Nikki had been living with Tyler McCain at the time of her disappearance. Days later, on a Friday, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office made an announcement that shattered any remaining hope her family had been holding on to. Nikki's case was being reclassified. She was no longer a missing person. She was now, officially, the presumed victim of a homicide. The Sheriff's Office statement was blunt. Based on the evidence gathered, information learned from interviews, and the fact that none of Nikki's family members had heard from her since her disappearance, detectives had determined she was a victim of homicide. Persons of interest were identified, names weren't released. The investigation was still active. But notably, at that point, officials stated publicly that Tyler McCain had never officially been named a suspect. Just days before that homicide ruling, in fact, he had spoken to local media for the first time about his wife's disappearance, continuing to publicly call for the public's help finding her. It's a chilling detail that shows up again and again in cases like this. A spouse standing in front of cameras, appearing to search for someone that investigators would later allege they already knew was gone. There's one more piece of this puzzle worth pulling apart. A moment in April 2025 that added another layer to the picture prosecutors would eventually paint in court. Tyler McCain was pulled over after being spotted driving erratically, unable to stay within his lane. It's a small, almost mundane law enforcement encounter on its surface. A traffic stop. But in the context of an active homicide investigation into his missing wife, every interaction like this becomes part of the broader case file, another data point investigators weigh as they build toward an arrest. By this point, the net was tightening, and on a Wednesday morning in August 2025, it finally closed. At approximately 10:15 a.m. on Wednesday, August 20th, 2025, detectives obtained a murder arrest warrant for Tyler McCain. Sheriff Michael Johnson announced it himself. Tyler McCain was arrested and ultimately booked into the Shasta County Jail with no bail for the murder of his wife, Nikki, 15 months. That's how long it took from the moment Nikki's sister filed that missing persons report to the moment her husband was led into custody. The charges announced by the Shasta County District Attorney's Office were severe: 1 count of murder, carrying a special circumstance allegation that the killing was committed with the intent to prevent Nikki's testimony. Alongside that, prosecutors refiled the original domestic violence charges from the 2023 incident: corporal injury to a spouse, false imprisonment, criminal threats, and assault with force likely to cause great bodily injury. That special circumstance is worth pausing on because it's not a charge you see attached to every homicide. It represents the state's formal allegation that Nikki wasn't just killed. She was killed, prosecutors allege, specifically to keep her from standing up in a courtroom and testifying against the man she was married to. If proven, it transforms this case from a domestic tragedy into something even darker, an alleged act calculated to obstruct justice itself, using violence as the final word in an argument Nikki was never allowed to have on the record. Investigators also revealed something else that had been developing quietly behind the scenes. A confidential report in which Tyler allegedly admitted to killing Nikki following a domestic violence incident. It's the kind of detail that, if it holds up through trial, could become one of the most consequential pieces of evidence prosecutors present to a jury. 2 days later, on August 22, 2025, Tyler McCain stood in Shasta County Superior Court and pleaded not guilty to every charge against him. To this day, Nikki's body has never been found. This is, according to reporting on the case, the first no-body murder prosecution in Shasta County's history, meaning prosecutors are attempting to prove a homicide occurred entirely through forensic and circumstantial evidence without ever recovering the victim herself. A preliminary hearing isn't a trial, it's a legal checkpoint, where a judge decides whether prosecutors have presented enough evidence for a case to move forward to a full jury trial. In Tyler McCain's case, that hearing stretched across 8 grueling court days in September 2025. And it's here that some of the most gut-wrenching testimony in this entire case came to light. Forensic interviews with Nikki and Tyler's 4 children. Children who, following their mother's death, lost custody of both parents and are now being raised by one of Nikki's sisters, were shared in that courtroom. According to reporting on the hearing, the children told forensic interviewers they had witnessed their father hit and otherwise harm their mother. One detail from those interviews is almost impossible to forget. One of the children remembered their father as, in their words, a pretty nice guy, but also told the interviewer that their mother would sometimes position herself between the children and their father, using them as a kind of shield because she knew he wouldn't hurt them. Read that again. A mother, allegedly enduring violence in her own home, strategically placing her children's bodies between herself and her husband, not because she thought it would protect her, but because she knew, with heartbreaking certainty, that he would never risk hurting them. If that detail is accurate, it tells you everything about the kind of calculation abuse survivors are forced to make inside their own homes, every single day, just to get through it. The hearing also revealed testimony from Nikki's younger sister, Chloe Saley, about a meeting that took place at defense attorney Michael Borges's office on April 10, 2024, just over a month before Nikki disappeared. According to Chloe's testimony, Nikki called her immediately after that meeting and said Tyler had tricked her into showing up. That claim became significant enough that prosecutors filed a motion to disqualify Borges from representing Tyler McCain altogether. The judge ultimately allowed him to stay on the case, but the fact that prosecutors tried to remove him at all tells you how seriously they treated that meeting as a potential piece of the puzzle. At the conclusion of that 8-day hearing, the judge ruled there was enough evidence for Tyler McCain to be held to answer on every charge, murder and all associated domestic violence counts. The case was moving to trial. If you've followed any high-profile criminal case, you know that trial date is often more of a suggestion than a promise. Nikki's case has proven no different. A trial was first set for November 18, 2025. That date came and went, postponed after McCain's defense attorney told the court he needed more time, citing an overwhelming volume of material from the DA's office. 4,500 written pages, with several thousand more arriving in just the final 30 days before that hearing. The court reset the trial for March 17, 2026, with a readiness conference set for March 11th. That date didn't hold either. Just before it arrived, the trial was postponed again, this time because McCain's defense attorney was tied up in another murder trial and would have been unavailable. As it currently stands, Tyler McCain's trial readiness conference is scheduled for August 19, 2026, with jury selection and trial set to begin August 25, 2026, more than 2 full years after Nikki Saley McCain vanished from a rural stretch of Northern California. Throughout every one of these delays, One fact hasn't changed. Tyler McCain remains in the Shasta County Jail, held without bail. And it's critical to say clearly, here, on this channel, Tyler McCain has pleaded not guilty to every charge against him. Under the law, he is presumed innocent unless and until a jury finds otherwise. Everything described in this video, the DNA evidence, the alleged confession, the children's testimony, represents the allegations and evidence prosecutors have presented in court filings and hearings so far. It has not yet been tested by a full trial and a final verdict. That's not a technicality. That's the entire point of what's coming this August. Behind every court date, every continuance, every dry legal filing in this case, there are two women who have spent more than 2 years refusing to let their sister become a statistic: Chloe Saley and Kay Saley Ford. From the very first weeks Nikki was missing, her sisters organised search efforts, gave interviews, and kept pressure on investigators and the public alike. Kay spoke to reporters early on, describing how Nikki last communicated with her sisters that final evening by text, the same detail we opened this video with. This case first drew national attention through NBC's Dateline, which featured Nikki's story in its Missing in America series back in July 2024, months before her case was even reclassified as a homicide. That kind of sustained media attention doesn't happen by accident. It happens because families like Nikki's refuse to let the story die down. Advocates for domestic violence awareness, along with organisations focused on missing and murdered Indigenous persons, have pointed to Nikki's case as a stark example of the dangers facing victims of intimate partner violence, especially those who come forward, report their abuse, and are still failed by gaps in the system that allowed her alleged abuser's charges to be dismissed in the very weeks she vanished. There is still, as of the most recent reporting, a reward of up to $30,000 being offered for information leading to the location of Nikki's remains. Anyone with information is urged to contact the Shasta County Sheriff's Office Major Crimes Unit, because even with an arrest, even with DNA evidence, even with charges and hearings and a trial date on the calendar, Nikki Saley McCain still hasn't been found. Her children are being raised without her. Her sisters are still waiting for the one thing that no court appearance can ever fully give them back. So where does the Nikki Saley McCain case stand right now? Tyler McCain sits in the Shasta County Jail, held without bail, having pleaded not guilty to murder with a special circumstance, and multiple domestic violence charges, tied to an alleged assault in December 2023. A judge has already ruled there's enough evidence for this case to go before a jury. That jury trial, after 2 prior postponements, is now scheduled to begin August 25th, 2026. Nikki's body has never been recovered. This remains Shasta County's first ever no-body murder prosecution. And her 4 children are growing up in the care of an aunt, carrying memories that forensic interviewers have already had to ask them to relive once, inside a courtroom, months before the trial that will decide their father's fate has even begun. This is a case we will be watching closely on this channel, because when that trial finally starts in August, the evidence we've walked through today, the blood on that sheet, the DNA in that truck bed, the alleged confession, the testimony of children who watched something no child should ever witness, all of it is going to be tested in front of a jury for the very first time. If this case moved you the way it moved me putting it together, do 3 things before you go. Subscribe to Crime Autopsy so you're notified the moment we cover the trial as it unfolds. Hit the like button. It genuinely helps this story reach more people, and cases like Nikki's deserve to stay visible. And down in the comments, tell me, do you think prosecutors can prove a murder case without ever finding a body? I want to see your take before this trial even starts. I'm Crime Autopsy. We'll see you in the next case.